in August, a couple of videos were released on my channel. One pointing out that on the table, that the G column was printed on the New Taipei City tables. Okay, so the G column is like the total ballots for that voting station, the 总票数. Okay, so E plus F equals G. Okay, now the question is does E plus F really equal G?
现在我们要来看侯友宜执政的新北市在这次总统大选中发生了什么样惊人的作票行为。从新北市的投开票报告表来看，我们发现一件事，选举总人数于事前全部都打印好，这里面是隐藏着什么样重大的作票讯息。我们来看这三栏，领票人数 E 加上空白票 F 等于选举总人数 G。 投开票报告表中明白地指出 E 加 F 等于 G， E 和 F 都还未知， G 的选举总人数怎么可能就于投票前先出现了呢？这些都是要在现场填写的数字，必须是依当天领票情形与剩下的空白票如实填写，数字若有异常，便可以追踪选务问题。去投票的人有领票不投的变数，有选票损坏重领的变数，也或有人偷空白票或选务人员多发票给特定人士的状况，也还会有人夹带灌票的情形。举凡投票现场种种不可测的现象，在选举过程中都有可能发生，也因此在领票人数 E 和空白票 F 存有诸多变数的情形下，G 的选举总人数是不可能于事前就可预知的。
I think that a lot of people misunderstood that because the 总票数 cannot change in a voting station, that it's okay to print the G column. But there's actually a lot more going on with this column being printed. It looks, in a sense, it looks like they're just making it easy on the election stuff, but it's actually completely inappropriate to print that column. A lot of people don't understand what the purpose of that table is.
The purpose of the table, the ballots given to voters, which is the E column, and then manually count all the leftover ballots, the ballots that were given to the voting station by the Central Election Commission, but were not given to voters, which ends up being the figure in column F. So the goal of the election staff is to add up these two columns, E and F, to see if the total still matches with the total number of voters in the voting station, which is in fact known before voting starts. However, the goal is to match that figure to prove that no election fraud took place in that voting station. While the figures in the G column are all known before voting starts, the goal is to reach that figure. The election staff cannot assume that the ballots in the voting station actually add up to reach that figure. If they do not reach that figure, for example, in this ballot report, the total is 1,627 for the presidential ballots. However, what happens if they add up E and F and they get 1,600? Then that means there are 27 ballots missing from this voting station, and an investigation is required. The election staff have to prove to the Central Election Commission that they didn't cheat. So take this box of ballots from the August 15th by-election in Kaohsiung. This voting station 1015 in Sanmin District has a total of 1,452 ballots inside. Let's say, for example, that 452 were given out to voters. Therefore, the E column should read 452. The F column should read exactly 1,000. Both of these columns, the number of cast ballots and leftover ballots, need to be counted manually. Then, theoretically, they should add up to 1,452. So while the total number of voters is known in the station, the goal is to meet that number. Therefore, the G column is supposed to be left blank. And if the total number of ballots, E plus F, doesn't equal that number, 1,452, then an investigation is required. Perhaps ballots were stolen from the voting station. Perhaps ballots were brought into the voting station. Perhaps the Central Election Commission didn't actually give the voting station 1,452 ballots.
如果发现选举人将选举票带出投开票所， 主任管理员应该跟主任监察员请警卫人员将该选举人予以留置，并且要联络分局派员处理。另外还要通报选举委员会监察小组，同时将该张选举票收回，并且将事实附记在选举人员名册该选举人的备注栏里面。收回的选举票另外包封之后呢，列入已领未投票计算，并且将事实附记于投开票所报告表的其他有关事项栏内。
There are many possibilities for why the ballots wouldn't add up to 1,452, and that is why the G column is supposed to be left blank. This is so that the actual number of ballots, E+F, can actually be reported.
接下来，清点选举人名册上的领票人数和未领票人数，并且呢要清点用余票。将用余票包装好之后呢，在用余票袋上记上用余票的张数，最后填写投开票的报告表。
So these are all the steps required to verify the total number of ballots in the voting station are correct. The number of ballots cast and the number of ballots left over need to be counted by the election staff in order to make sure they match the total number of voters in the voting station. However, because the G column was printed in the 2020 presidential election in New Taipei City, this made it more convenient for the election staff to rig the election by adding and subtracting ballots as they saw fit. In other words, they could add as many ballots as they wished or subtract as many ballots as they wished, and they didn't have to worry about it adding up to exactly 1,627. It would always add up to 1,627 because it was printed there already for them. Therefore, they could take the total number of voters in the voting station and subtract the number of total ballots cast to reach the number of remaining ballots. So what they did was, instead of E+F equals G, they did G minus E equals F. So what happens when the election staff are stuffing and stealing ballots like this is that the remaining number of ballots could very well be messed up. It could be incorrect. In order to save time counting them and trying to make it all match, they simply printed the total number of voters, and therefore they could determine the number of leftover ballots by subtracting the number of ballots cast from the total number of voters to determine the leftover ballots. After they were done stuffing and stealing, to put it simply, by printing the G column, the total number of voters, the election staff could simply skip the final step of counting the remaining ballots, the leftover ballots. Because in general, the staff stuffed more than they stole, the number of remaining ballots in each station would be incorrect. When this happens, there will be too many leftover ballots. To give an example, if the election staff stuff 100 ballots but steal only 70 ballots, what will happen is that there will be 30 additional leftover ballots. This will give the election staff the burden of removing 30 leftover ballots before putting them into the envelope, thus making their job more difficult and increasing the chances of the public catching them in the act. Therefore, they could simply skip this step and complete the ballot report table, and it would always be correct because it was printed for them already. So we can see here that in all the other ballot report tables in New Taipei City, the G column was printed. As far as we know, all of New Taipei City's ballot report tables have the G column printed. So let's review what happened in 2018 and 2020 in New Taipei City. In 2018, the KMT got 1.165 million ballots, compared to the DPP that got 873,000 ballots. However, in the presidential election, the KMT got only 959,000 ballots, and the DPP got a whopping 1.393 million ballots, a massive increase in DPP support in New Taipei City, without much of a decrease in KMT support. So the DPP increase was 520,244 ballots, and the KMT decrease was 205,499 ballots. That's a percentage increase for the DPP of 59.55%, while KMT support decreased by only 17.64%. The difference between the DPP increase and the KMT decrease was 41.91%. This is a huge difference between the two sides. This big of a difference between the two sides suggests massive ballot stuffing. We should also see a negative correlation between the two camps. However, as we have established in previous videos, the correlation between the two sides was strongly positive. So the KMT relative support rate between these 2 points is about 0.02% to a 35% decrease. Between those 2 points for the DPP we see an increase of 30 to 95% in the same areas. And we can also see a strong positive correlation, which means that when the KMT has less, the DPP has less, and when the KMT has more, the DPP has more. So at this point right here, we can see KMT support decreasing by about 35%, while DPP support increases by about 0 to 30%. However, in these areas right here, KMT support decreased by only a little bit, by about 0.02%, while DPP support increased by 30 to 100% or more. This is totally not reasonable. This suggests that not enough ballots were stolen here for the KMT, while the DPP support rate increased by about double from last time. This is negligence from the election staff. They are simply stuffing way too many ballots and not stealing enough from the KMT. By stuffing more than 40% for Tsai Ing-wen, then stealing from Han Kuo-Yu on January 11th, 2020, this would result in the election staff having way too many leftover ballots to be put into the envelopes at the end of the day. While they can easily determine how many leftover ballots they should have by subtracting the total number of ballots cast from the total number of voters in the station, they still have to put that exact amount into the envelope. By printing the G column, this assisted them in making their jobs easier, and it also guaranteed that all voting stations in New Taipei City had no problems. Therefore, no investigation can be warranted when the number of total voters in the station is always reached properly by printing the G column. This heavily assisted the election staff in stuffing and stealing any number of ballots they wished. And this is why printing the G column assists the election staff in rigging the election. Now, what does the NGO, the Taiwan Fact Check Center, think about all this? This is case 565 for them, and they claim that this part of the video posted to YouTube was fake. So they are attempting to say that the G column is in fact known. It reads here that 因此中选会人名册依法必须在投票日15日前在乡镇市区公所公开陈列公开阅览。中选会也在投票日前宣布全国选举人数传言宣称选举人数不可能事前预知，不符事实。So what they were saying is that the total number of voters in the voting station is posted 15 days before in all parts of Taiwan and is therefore known. Therefore, the claim that you can't know the total number of voters in the voting station is untrue. However, the video was not claiming the number of voters in the voting station was unknown. The video was claiming that you can't print the column for the total number of voters because you have to manually count the number of ballots cast plus the leftover ballots to make sure it actually equals the total number of voters in the station. So let's take a look at this ballot report table from Pingdong. We can see in the G column that the total number of voters for the presidential election is 1,338. While this number is known before the election staff did in fact verify that it is correct by adding up E and F manually. This is the normal way to report to the Central Election Commission that the number of cast ballots plus the number of leftover ballots equal the total number of voters in the station. So why would the NGO, the Taiwan Fact Check Center, be unaware of such a basic concept in filling out the ballot report table? After all, they are in a position where they need to determine what the truth is. All they would have to do is check with the Central Election Commission to find out the truth. All of this information is public. However, they simply claimed that the figure is known beforehand. Therefore, this video is untrue. And based on their claim that the video is untrue, they blocked this video from being posted on Facebook. However, the claim is actually true. You cannot print the G column because you have to verify if the total number of voters is correct. You have to add E and F manually to see if it matches. The Taiwan Fact Check Center pretended to not know what the purpose of the ballot report table is, and this is to help cover up for the election fraud that took place in New Taipei City. So who's really correct? Was it the video posted, or is the Taiwan Fact Check Center correct? Well, let's look at the Central Election Commission's own video from 2018 to settle this dispute.
投开票关键任务。
好，现在已经开票完毕，请大家确认一下，这个投票柜已经全空，里面没有任何选举票。整票计票管理员，请问选举票都已经计票完毕了吗？
是的，选举票都计算完毕了。 现在麻烦监察员会同复算选举票。
没问题，复算完毕了。
我已经填好所有候选人的得票数喽，请问方便核对总票数了吗？
可以，我这边也复算完毕了。主任管理员、主任监察员，总票数已经核对完毕了，没有任何问题，可以包封选举票喽。
So there you have it. I guess the election staff do in fact have to verify the total number of voters in the station before they can put the ballots away in the envelopes. They do have to manually count E and F to see if they equal G, despite the fact that the number of voters is known beforehand. So perhaps the Taiwan Fact Check Center would like to check their facts before producing a report saying such and such video posted on YouTube is false and blocking it on Facebook. Because this looks an awful lot like spreading disinformation for the sake of covering up election fraud committed by the election staff on January 11th, 2020, this looks an awful lot like censorship on the internet.